Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this is the Sony WF-1000XM4, and if you'll forgive me for the rest of this video, I'll just call them the XM4s. Try not to get it confused with the headphone. I know they look a lot alike. But anyway, this is Sony's newest true wireless earphone, the successor to the WF-1000XM3s, and they cost $280, which is not cheap in the true wireless space, but it's also maybe not that crazy when you compare it to something like the Apple AirPods Pro. And so for the past couple of weeks, that's what I've been doing. I've been listening to these things and I've been comparing them against my favorites and kind of the, we'll call it the top tier of true wireless earphones. And that includes, in my opinion, the Apple AirPods Pro. I also really like the Samsung Galaxy Buds Plus, which is not actually the newest model, but that's the one I prefer. But I've also been comparing them to the Sony XM3s as well, just so we have kind of that linear transition to compare to. So yeah, I've been spending some time listening to these things, living with them, listening to podcasts, going on hikes, hitting the heavy bag, but mostly honestly just sitting around the couch and listening to music, because I wanted to know, how do these things stack up in terms of usability and functionality, but also really importantly, how do they stack up when it comes to listening to music? And that is a category I separate differently. So in this review, and I'm going to warn you, this might be a long one, I'm going to talk about everything that is important to me about the Sony XM4s. We'll talk about what, the build quality, what comes in them, how they fit, etc. We'll talk about the general functionality, some of the Bluetooth stuff that might become a problem, depending on which earphone you're talking about. They don't all do it well. And then we'll talk about the sound quality, and then I'm going to end the review with kind of like a stack ranking between those 4 different earphones that I talked about. 4 including the XM4s if you're thinking he only mentioned 3 of them. But yeah, that's going to be this review, and if you're watching now live, if you have any questions about the XM4s or any of the other earphones that I talk about, or maybe even some ones I don't talk about, leave them in the live chat, and at the end of the review, we'll have a little conversation. But for now, let's just go ahead and dive into the Sony XM4s. And sure, I'll spin them. Why not? I don't normally spin them at this point, but we'll talk about first just what comes inside the box. And unfortunately, no, a high-res placebo pen does not come in the box of the XM4s. In fact, the packaging is pretty minimal. If you saw the unboxing, this is the box that it comes in. Very simple and, I don't know, kind of classy, but you get a micro USB to USB-A cable for charging, a very shorty cable, but that's probably all you'll need to connect them to a laptop or something like that. And then you get a set of ear tips, and interestingly, you only get basically just this one set. You get 3 different ear tips in medium, smalls, and large. And let's go ahead and punch in on these things just for a quick reminder if you missed the unboxing. These are a pretty interesting ear tip from Sony. I'm not honestly a big fan of these. They're fine. They're just kind of, they're kind of like a foam silicone hybrid. You can see that it's silicone here on the inside, but then the outside has got like this memory foam sort of makeup. And I'm not a big fan of them just because they're a little bit on the bulky side. They're not necessarily, I don't know, honestly, they fit fine. But they weren't my favorite tips, and I would have preferred to get silicone tips. Maybe that's just my bias. I prefer silicone tips, and it was curious that the XM4 only comes with these foam hybrid tips. Let's see, anything else to talk about inside the box? I don't think so, because that's honestly it until you get to the main unit itself. And we'll talk about this case, which I gotta say right off the bat is, in my opinion, a big improvement over the case for the original XM3s. And I'll slide that in the camera view just for comparison. You can see how much larger the case on the XM3s is. I think this size on the XM4s is just a massive improvement. Now, it's not as small as something like, the AirPods Pro, which are still definitely much thinner and more pocketable, but I do think that the size improvement here, as well as the fact that this doesn't use like the XM3 case, this has like kind of a soft touch material, which actually feels premium, and I would say this case feels more premium. But it's actually, not that great for putting into a pocket because of that soft touch. It can, grip your pocket and turn it inside out, whereas I don't have that issue here. It's a little bit smoother. It slides out easier for me. So apart from the size, maybe my one complaint is I do wish that the lid opened up a little bit further. You can see it basically opens up to about 90 degrees, and the sort of ingress and egress is not terrible. Pretty typical, honestly, but that was one of the things that's kind of nice about the XM3 case, is that it opens up a little bit wider and makes it easier to get into. So yeah, that's the case. let's go ahead and talk about the earpieces themselves. Well, for that, we'll zoom in. And just up front, I'll say that these earpieces are on the large side. And I'll pull in the other earpieces here for comparisons, but you can just kind of see these are pretty chunky. Let me go ahead and throw them on my ears actually, so you can see how they fit. Fit generally for me was fine. Like I would say that they're comfortable, maybe not the most secure fitting, but I don't know, that's what it looks like inside my ear. They do, I don't know, I've seen some people comment about the fact that these things don't necessarily fully sit inside of the ear bowl right here, the concha. And that's kind of the case with me. If I wanted to, I can kind of manipulate it in a way that it fits in a little bit tighter, but it's a little bit more work that way, and frankly, it's not necessarily more comfortable, and I didn't find that necessary. Generally, I found that these things fit pretty securely. Again, I think I mentioned in the intro, I actually spent some time like doing jump rope and hitting the heavy bag with these things, and I didn't have any issue with them sitting in place. Still not the most secure fitting, and we'll talk about that in the comparisons, but I thought that for the most part, they're pretty decent little buds. Well, pretty decent big buds, right? Anything else to talk about? I mean, here, let's go ahead and pull in the other ones just for size comparisons. And here are the XM3s. This is what an XM3 bud looks like in comparison to the XM4. So itself, or the XM3 was itself a bit of a chunky beast. And I would say fit-wise between these two, I don't know, they're about the same. I like the silicone tips on here. I get maybe a little bit better purchase on the inside of my ear canal with those, but for the most part, roughly the same. And then if we pull in something like the Galaxy Buds, if you're familiar with these, you can see that the size maybe externally is kind of similar, although the Galaxy Buds are a little on the slimmer side. Let's see if we can hold them by the stem so you can get the full power of that. And generally, I would say that the fit on the Galaxy Buds, they just fit deeper into my ear canals, and because of that, they're more secure for me. But then finally, we'll pull in the AirPods Pro just for that final size comparison. And you can see that these are a lot more svelte, I suppose, a lot more compact, and we'll talk about that fit comparison in a little bit later, but I don't know. Generally, I prefer the AirPods Pro, and I would say of these three, you know, the fit on these things is not bad, but it's not my favorite. Anything else that I wanted to talk about in terms of the build quality? I'm just checking my notes real quickly. You know, I did mention they stick outside, you know, they're a little bit large, and because of that, they stick outside the head a little bit. Not a big deal in my opinion, but the one thing that I think is worth mentioning is that they actually have a pretty decent amount or decent place to hold them, which is important because these things have touch controls. And if you've used a true wireless IM with touch controls on them before, you've probably had the experience where when you're putting them in your ears, you're accidentally activating the controls. I find that if I hold the XM4 just kind of like this, and this little piece right here, I think this is like a microphone or something like that, but if I hold it like this, I basically have plenty of something to touch and hold and put it in my ear without accidentally activating the touch controls, which for me is honestly kind of a big deal. So that said, let's go ahead and dive into some of the actual functionality here on the XM4s and just dive in a little bit more on those touch controls, which I started to mention. They are somewhat customizable, so if you don't like the default configuration, you can dive into the app, and there's basically like presets for the touch controls, and the presets are like, there's playback preset, there's an active noise canceling preset, and then there's volume control preset, and then you can pick one of those presets for either ear. It's not totally customizable, but I found that it was, you know, it was pretty fine, and it avoids being overly complicated like some, I don't know, I found some budget true wireless IMs, their touch controls are just really kind of absurd. They're nice and simple here, and honestly, I didn't really have any issues with them. That said, you know, I did talk about not really having any issues accidentally touching controls on here. I did kind of have the opposite issue sometimes, and this is pretty typical of touch controls in general, is that sometimes I would find myself tapping the thing and I would miss it, or maybe I wasn't tapping exactly the right spot. I don't know. It's just one of those things with touch controls. You got to be pretty particular about it. And there were some times where I would tap it, the thing that I wanted to happen didn't happen, so I'd have to do it again. I don't know. Is that a big deal? Make that up. Make your own mind up. That was what I wanted to say right there. But yeah, one thing that is pretty nice about these things though is that they do have a couple of automatic features in them. So the AirPods, right? They're well known for when you take them out of your ears, they automatically pause. And surprisingly, not a lot of other true wireless IMs do that. The Sonys, however, they do. The XM3s did as well, but the XM4s do, and I actually really like that. And that works also on Android, where the AirPods, that functionality only works if you're using them on an iPhone, because I think Apple's being a little petty. But yeah, I like that. There's also some like speak to chat functionality, which I was curious to try out. Basically, when you have these things in your ears and you're listening to music and you start talking, they will automatically enable transparency mode and pause your music so that you could have a conversation, which I think is a really cool idea. But then, like, as soon as I tried doing it, I found out why I don't want that. And it's, if you at all like sing to yourself, that will trigger the automatic pausing and transparency mode, which kind of disrupts the vibe. So I don't know. Yeah, I thought it was a cool feature, and maybe there's another solve for that. But for me, I guess I ended up just really not using that feature because I guess I sing to myself more than I thought I did. But yeah. Let's see. We can dive into just some basic true wireless Bluetooth stuff like that to talk about, you know. And this stuff is still worth referencing because a lot of Bluetooth stuff still isn't super reliable. And I found that the XM4s were pretty solid on the Bluetooth connection stuff. So like typical true wireless earbuds, right? They're in the case, they disconnect and start charging automatically. You take them out of the case, they automatically connect and pair. Generally pretty good. There were some times when there was just a little bit of awkwardness in that repairing with my phone, and I'm not sure if it's because I have got a slower phone or something, but I don't know. They basically would be, I would say, a 1 in 10 chance that I would pull these things out of the case, connect them to my phone, and it would take maybe like 5 to 10 seconds for them to be fully paired up. And sometimes I would even have to put them back into the case and then take them out to get a really good connection. When you take them out of the case and you put them in your ears, they announce their battery life, which seems like a nice little touch, except that it announces them independently, which I kind of makes sense because they each have their own battery, but I really didn't like taking them out of the case, putting them in my head, hearing it say Bluetooth connected out of both earpieces, and then hearing one say battery charged, and then the other one a second later saying battery charged. It was just way too much rigmarole on just the initial taking them out and putting them in my head. So fortunately, I did find that there is an option in the app to disable that completely. You still can hear that they're connected to Bluetooth, but you can disable the battery announcement. And if you've got a pair of these, I recommend digging into that app and finding that option. Okay, any other things that I wanted to talk about? I mean, I did say that the connectivity on here, you know, sometimes a little flaky to start with, but once they're connected, generally I had a pretty good connection, nice and consistent, solid range on especially my MacBook Air. I'm not sure what that's about. I think the Bluetooth on my MacBook just must be really strong, but like I could have my MacBook Air in my living room and basically walk all around my house with the XM4s and have a pretty stable connection, which was pretty impressive. And maybe the reason I didn't get such a good connection, it was a fine connection, honestly, on my Xperia 10, which is, here's the phone I was using. The connection there was actually pretty fine, but maybe a big difference that I didn't actually consider until just this moment, real time, is that on the Xperia I was using LDAC, and that's actually one of the things that makes the XM4s especially appealing for audio nerds like us. You're watching now, I'm assuming you're one of us. But LDAC, it's just the highest bitrate codec that Bluetooth has right now. If I'm using these on a MacBook, I'm only getting AAC, which maybe has a more stable connection, but not as high of a bitrate. Here with LDAC, which I get on Android, you get that higher bitrate and maybe a little bit less stable because of that. But generally, I found it worth it. Frankly, I didn't do a lot of comparison between LDAC and AAC on my Android device. I just stuck it in LDAC and left it there because I liked it. Yeah, and one of the things that's kind of nice too is that these things are very, very customizable with EQ, and some of Sony's other headphones are customizable with EQ as well, but when you do that, it automatically knocks you down from LDAC to a lower bitrate codec. Not the case here with the XM4s. These things stay connected with LDAC no matter what, which I found to be pretty awesome. And then the last point that I'll talk about in the connectivity, and then we've got a little bit more to go before sound, but the last point I'll make about the connectivity is that they're generally pretty easy to switch between multiple devices. I don't think that the XM4s explicitly support multi-point connection, But honestly, I find multi-point and Bluetooth generally pretty cumbersome. What these do is that you can pair them to multiple devices. I have them paired very, commonly between my MacBook and my Xperia phone. And then pretty quickly, I can just go into the Bluetooth settings of whichever device I want to use. Let's say my MacBook. Say I want to connect to these, and it'll automatically switch over to that device. It's not quite automatic in that it's not like multi-point will try and detect which device you're listening to. But again, I find it pretty cumbersome. So I found that this solution was actually, honestly, just as convenient and pretty good. I liked being able to switch between devices on here. So the last bit that I wanted to talk about before we get into the sound quality is actually, pay some attention to the active noise canceling features here, because that is a big feature on the XM4s. Sony is definitely making a big deal of active noise canceling. And I gotta say, it's pretty good. I did compare them to the noise canceling here on the XM3s, which these also have noise canceling, but honestly, like it's decent, but it's not that effective. It's not that much more effective than just regular passive noise canceling. The XM4s, I found the noise canceling actually pretty impressive. I compared it with the Apple AirPods Pro, which do actually have pretty nice noise canceling themselves. I think they're pretty close. I think that's probably closer than you might expect, but I would probably give the edge to the XM4s. I mean, like a lot of these comparisons with noise canceling, some headphones will do better with certain sound frequencies, and I didn't spend enough time, digging into which one is better in which exact scenario. My general sense, though, is that they're all both of these are quite good in the noise canceling department. The other thing that I think is really impressive about the XM4s is not just the noise canceling, but also the transparency mode, which is a thing that the AirPods do quite well. And I think is actually, it's a big boon to sort of the convenience factor of a true wireless IM, is when you have these things in your ears, you're going about your day and you need to talk to somebody or hear your environment. Do you have to pull them out of your ears to do that? Or can you activate a transparency mode and effectively, get what you want out of it? Now, a lot of things support transparency modes or something like it, but not a lot of them are very livable. Like, they're fine as a temporary thing, but you wouldn't want to leave them on for a long time. Apple has kind of been the one exception where I feel like the AirPods Pro and even the AirPods Max, their transparency mode is so good that I could just leave it on and go about my day and not be too bothered by it. And I gotta say, the transparency mode here in the XM4s is honestly just about as good. I was pretty impressed because, again, most transparency modes, and the Galaxy Buds Plus are a good example of it. These have a transparency mode in them, but it's functional. It'll get you through whatever you need to listen to, but you wouldn't leave it on all the time. The XM4s, you could if you wanted to. Okay, I think that's about as much as we'll talk about. I mean, I mentioned that there is an app, and we could dive into details about this app, but I think I will leave that for another time. And instead, we'll just dive into talking about the sound quality here on the Sony WF-1000XM4s. And generally, I'll start by talking about kind of the initial, just the tonality of it. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the details and stuff like that. But I was pretty surprised at the initial tune of these things, especially given the fact that these seem to be getting pretty positive reviews from a lot of other reviewers. And I haven't dug into those reviews. Maybe they do talk about using EQ, but in my opinion, the stock tuning on these things is not ideal. It's pretty warm, it's pretty thick, and the treble is quite rolled off. It's very relaxed treble, which could be a benefit if you are allergic to treble. In fact, I would say that, there's basically no issues with treble in terms of fatigue or sibilance or anything like that, which I guess is a good thing. I wouldn't say that about any of these other true wireless IMs that we're talking about, but having a dark treble response does give you that. I don't know, I guess you could describe this as it's a little dark in the top end, but it does give you a full-bodied sound, and it does it without being soupy, which is kind of the risk of having an overly low-end dominant sound, which this is. This is in its stock tune. I would say a low-end dominant tuning, but it does avoid being soupy, which is good. It's not going to be fatiguing, but I do find it maybe a little bit on the boring side. And frankly, I'm pretty surprised that this is the stock tuning that they went with. And frankly, I'm pretty surprised that a lot of people like this as much as they do. Maybe, again, they are using the EQ and I just haven't dug that deep into the reviews. And maybe that's why they like it, is because of the EQ stuff. But I think that the stock tuning on here It's not totally wonking, but it's just a little bit of a confusing choice. Now that said, it does get better with EQ. And I talked about EQ a little bit during the functionality stuff, talking about the Bluetooth and the LDAC, right? This app that's built into the phone gives you not super fine-tuned control over the EQ, but it gives you enough controls to, I think, bring the tone at least to a place where I like it better. And it does it without sacrificing your Bluetooth codec, and because the EQ actually gets written into the memory of the earbuds itself. If you take these from one device to the next, they will carry your EQ through. So normally when I review earphones and headphones and stuff like that, I don't take EQ into consideration because I don't know what your situation is going to be like. Can you count on EQ? I don't like using EQ very much generally, but because this is all built into the earphone, and ostensibly its stock tune is using its own digital signal processing, there's really no downside to using EQ. So for the most part, the rest of this review, I'm going to consider this with my preferred EQ settings. And if you're interested in what my preferred EQ settings are, I've actually got not a link in the description down below, but in the description, I've got those EQ settings logged. Let me pull this out. You know what? I wasn't going to do this, but let's see if we can get this thing on camera so that you can take a look at what my EQ settings are. This is how these things pair to the app. And I'll also say up front too that, you know, I mentioned these ear tips were not my favorite ear tips, partly just because I don't really like foam ear tips, but also these ear tips kind of have, they have an effect on reducing the treble presence. What I found, and shout out to Big Boss in the Discord server for discovering this, is that this is a set of Finals E-type ear tips. These ear tips on this earphone, I found, actually brought out some treble presence, which was much needed. And then plus this EQ, which we're about to show, I found honestly got this tonality quite into a good place. So this is what my EQ looks like. The specific recipe is down there in the description again, but here at 2.5K, I've got it at +5. At 6.3, I've got it at +2, and at 16K, I've got it at +2. If you're using the stock tips, I would up the 6.3 maybe to +4 instead of +2, but with the final tips, because they give you a little bit of extra treble spiciness, I found that +2 was plenty. So with that in mind, what do I like about the tune here on the Sony XM4s? So generally what I like, I mean, I think that it's, you know, a well-controlled, detailed sound. I talked about it even in its stock tune being kind of warm and too dark for my preferences, but it's never soupy, which is a good sign that the driver in here is actually pretty technically competent. Yeah, I just found it generally a well-controlled, detailed sound. Found the bass to be fairly tight and punchy. You know, not super elevated, even though it is a low-end dominant sound. I would not describe this necessarily as like an overly bassy sound, especially with my tune, which brings up the top end. But yeah, it's just generally a pretty nice bass. It's authoritative. It's got a decent amount of texture to it. The mid-range on this is actually not scooped. This is one of the better mid-ranges, and I think that's part of one of my favorite things about the sound here, especially once you tune up that treble a little bit. It allows me to appreciate the mid-range quality on here, which is pretty solid. You know, it's actually surprisingly good resolution. And then the treble quality on this thing also surprisingly good. No splashiness, no sibilance, even with my increased treble EQ. And of all the true wireless IMs, I'll just give you like the spoiler. I think that of all the true wireless IMs that I've listened to, I think these are the most technical in their performance. Just the dynamic driver in here that they've gotten inside the XM4s is really pretty outstanding. What I don't like about the sound in the XM4s, with the stock tuning, I mean, I already talked about it. It's too rolled off. It's a little bit unengaging, a little flat. Good quality, but I don't love the stock tuning. But with my EQ, honestly, there's not much that I don't like about these things. Now, my EQ doesn't attempt to bring these in line with my exact tonal preferences. Usually when I EQ something, I want to preserve the character of the headphone or the earphone that I'm EQing, but give it a little bit something to solve the problem that I have with it. And that's what my EQ does with this. And with my EQ, honestly, I really don't have any complaints. I mean, maybe the sound staging on this thing isn't massive, but it's not massive in most earphones. And I did find that separation and layering and imaging is honestly pretty good for not just a true wireless earphone, but for an earphone in general, especially one of a warm tune. So that is what I think about the sound of the XM4s. Let's get into some rankings, right? I'm gonna go ahead and pull in the players here. Let's move this stuff aside so we've got a little bit more room. And I'm gonna attempt to rank these things from left to right, because that's where I've got the most space on this table. And I'm gonna rank them in a number of categories, and these are fairly arbitrary, but these were categories that were important to me. But yeah, let's just, I just talked about sound, so we might as well go ahead and rank these things in terms of sound. And I'm gonna start with actually putting the XM4s last in their stock tuning. I think in the stock tuning, not that these are bad sounding, again, they sound pretty technical, but just really warm and relaxed and kind of boring. I would put them last. I would say probably next in third place, I would rank the XM3s. You know, these things are maybe a little bit thick and mid-bassy for my taste, but pretty well defined and pleasant. And I think in the stock tuning, these do sound more exciting and engaging than the XM4s. The next, and we're talking mostly about music listening here, I would actually put the AirPods Pro. I think this is kind of, you know, maybe a little bit vanilla, but it's well done. Lacks some in the definition and layering, but the AirPods Pro are pretty competent. And then the number one in terms of sound quality, I would actually put the Galaxy Buds Plus, which, you know, maybe the mid-range on these things is a little bit on the thin side, but I do like that the bass here is pretty sub-bass focused. It's got a nice bass texture, I suppose. And my biggest complaint here is that the treble timbre, it's just a little bit on the plasticky side. Now, what if I EQ these things? I would actually put these things up to the front. With my EQ, especially with the final ear tips, these are my favorite in terms of sound quality. All right, so let's reset and let's talk about another category. We'll talk about isolation, which, you know, we're talking about passive isolation because not all of these things have noise canceling, but then also in combination with noise canceling, because I think that's important to a lot of folks. Unsurprisingly, I think the Galaxy Buds Plus have probably the worst isolation, but actually pretty good. Even though there's no active noise canceling here in the Galaxy Buds Plus, they do a pretty good job of filling your ear out. I would say next is probably the XM3s, which do almost as good a job of passive noise canceling, but they do have the benefit of active noise canceling. So again, not the best active noise canceling, but pretty good. And I did find in my testing that these things blocked out more sound than these things did. Next up, I would say that I'd probably throw in the AirPods Pro. I think these things have pretty strong active noise canceling. And then here with the XM4s, not only do you get pretty strong active noise canceling, but they're also pretty strong just passive noise canceling, where the AirPods Pro are not especially strong there, which, I don't know, if that's a benefit or not, that's up to you, I suppose. All right, reset them again. Let's talk about another category, and we'll talk about fit and comfort. And here, the order is maybe a little bit different, and I'm going through these categories so that you can kind of decide what's important for you and make a call for yourself. On the fit and comfort side, I would say that the XM3s are probably the worst, and none of these are uncomfortable. These ones are just, they're pretty large and bulky and not the most secure fitting in my ears. I would say that the XM4s are a little bit better than the XM3s, but not a lot, so I'd probably rank these third. Next up, I would say the Galaxy Buds Plus, which are by far of all of these the most secure fitting. So if you're doing like extreme sports or something like these, the Galaxy Buds Plus, especially if you've got those little fins on them, these things fit super secure and will not dislodge from my ears. But then the top one, my favorite in terms of comfort and fit, is the AirPods Pro. These things just slide into my ears really easy. I love how easy it is. With the other ones, you got to fiddle with them a little bit. But they're also just really comfortable. Then they don't take up a lot of space in the ear. So that's how I would rank them in terms of fit and comfort. And then my final category, we'll talk about convenience, which is a pretty broad category, but I'll get into the details about how I rank these in terms of convenience. And I would say that the bottom would still be the XM3s. You know, the case, honestly, is kind of a big deal for me. This case is just way too big. And you can see, in comparison to the others, how much bigger this case is. It just means it's not as portable. It's, you know, if I'm using these, it's less likely that I'm going to have the case on hand. And there's no real positive trade because of the large case. The next in terms of convenience, I'd actually probably give it to the Galaxy Buds. These things are super, I love the case on these. These things are really pocketable, quite good. Honestly, don't have any strong complaints. There is a transparency mode here, which I talked about. It's effective for a quick conversation, but you wouldn't want to leave it on all the time, and that's maybe it's one downside. And then maybe the other downside in terms of convenience is that these are really easy to accidentally activate the touch controls. I do it all the time. Almost every time I put these in my ears, I will activate touch controls by accident, and I find that an annoying thing that I wanted to mention and use that to rank it here at number 3. Now, we're down to the final 2, and we're just talking about convenience here. Honestly, I'll probably put the XM4s at number 2. You know, the case size is kind of in the middle of these. It's definitely not as small as the Galaxy Buds and the AirPods, so not quite as pocketable, but I didn't really have any complaints with the case size here. The transparency mode in here, honestly, is pretty excellent, and that helps quite a bit. And then versus the Galaxy Buds, I just had way fewer accidental touch controls. Really didn't have to worry about that much at all here. So there you go. All right, and then the AirPods, when it comes to convenience, I have basically no complaints about these things. Look at how small this case is. Transparency mode is great, and they're not touch controls. They're click controls. I mean, it's kind of a touch thing, but it's clicky. The controls here are fantastic. Simple, maybe you don't get access to a lot, but there you go. That is how I would rank these 4 true wireless IEMs in those different categories, but this is ostensibly a review of the Sony XM4s. So how do I score them? So out of 5 stars, I'm gonna go ahead and give them a very solid 4 stars. I haven't given any of these a perfect 5 stars if you're out there getting upset or anything like that. I've got complaints about all of them in some ways, but the XM4s I found to be honestly really pretty surprisingly satisfying. My experience with the XM3s, a large case, a sound that I found was pretty good, but I didn't love it. Kind of set me up to have not the highest expectations for the XM4s, but I did have hope, and I'm glad I had hope because these things, quite functional, nice small case, excellent noise canceling and transparency mode, and then the sound quality for music listening specifically, which is kind of a high bar. Once you factor in the EQ, and again, check out my EQ in the description down below, I think these things sound the best of all of these. Just really quite satisfying sound. So if you're interested in checking out the Sony XM4s, of course, I got a link in the description down below. While you're down there, if you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and why haven't you? Ding the YouTube bell so that YouTube lets you know next time I'm live, and then we can have a conversation like I'm about to have with the folks that are here right now. If you're not here live, I'll catch you in the next super review. If you are here live, let's chat. All right, folks, that was a bit of a doozy to get through. How long was that stream? 30 minutes, wow. I'm sorry. I tried to do that as quick as possible, but obviously I had a lot to say. But let me, as best as possible, catch up with the live chat and answer some questions. Early on crew, shout outs for showing up early. Axel Deeker, what's up? Big Boss, how's it going? D&T Arc. Always get a dab. I actually found out what a dab means. And it's funny. Well, the dab itself isn't that funny, but the fact that the dab became what it is with the etymology of the dab, that's a little bit funny. Das Ninja Sticks, glad you can make it too. You've been watching UFC? Well, I guess I know you're not watching UFC, but you're probably still secretly watching UFC. Scott Pledger, how's it going? Nice to see you there. And Rorix P4P, how's it going? Oh, you get a dab too. Yeah, don't worry about that. Oh, and Scott, I know you're asking about the PI7. I unfortunately was not able to listen to that in between me getting these and reviewing them. I don't know that I'll ever get a chance, honestly. But if somebody out there has them and I know them, I'll definitely ask about it. But not high on my priority list personally. What's up, Gunner? Katars, nice to see you. Glad you can make it to a live one. Edward Bador, what's up? Sony is the king of earbuds again. Still love my Bang & Olufsen E8s, but these are fantastic. So, Edward, does that mean you've got the XM4s yourself? What are your thoughts? Eduardo Cruz saying, oh dang, mine are about to arrive in a few minutes. Excited to try them out. My recommendation, listen to them stock and make up your own mind if the stock tuning bothers you. Again, for me, I found it really overly dark and surprisingly just kind of lifeless in the treble. And if you feel the same way, try out my EQ settings. I think it improves it quite a bit. David K saying Sony makes some great products, but also some of the worst. I'm curious, what would be your idea of some of Sony's worst products? I mean, I can say the Sony XM3 headphones, that is not a good headphone. I mean, I'm saying that like, I know a lot of people love that headphone and I'm not telling them that they're wrong, but for me, I do not want to listen to that headphone. The XM4 True Wireless with my EQ, yeah, I'll listen to that. Kai Road asking me, did I do that audiogram thing with the AirPods Pro? I assume you're asking about like the frequency response squiggling, and yes, the answer is yes. So in the description down below, there is a link to squig.link, which is my frequency response database. There's a link to it with the XM4 frequency response, but in the left column or the bottom table, if you're on mobile, you'll just scroll down and look for Apple AirPods. Should actually be near the top because it's alphabetical. But you can hit the plus button next to it and compare the AirPods frequency response versus the Sony XM4s. Definitely spent some time myself doing that this past couple weeks. Axel Deeker saying, I love the simple paper packaging. Everyone should have packaging like this. I do too. Let me, I do have one quibble. Not that this really matters, but one quibble with the paper packaging here. And it's that it like doesn't latch itself together. It's just like there was basically a kind of like a piece of cardboard wrap that held this thing together, but there's nothing that otherwise connects it. And I do wish that, I don't know, I'm gonna throw this thing away, so what do I care? But if I'm being picky, I do wish that it latched itself back together. Mainak Sharma asking, does DAC matter? Or does DAC make any difference for wireless earphones? And the answer is, the short answer is no, but the long answer is a little bit more complicated than that. Basically, if every wireless earphone, right, this thing has a DAC built into it. So if you have a different DAC on your phone or a different DAC on your computer, that doesn't touch the sound stack of this thing at all. This thing does, however, have its own DAC, which stands for digital to analog converter. Basically, because these receive a digital Bluetooth signal and they have to convert it into an analog audio source or audio output. So that's what a DAC does. So I guess the complicated answer is that yes, every true wireless IM has its own DAC built in. But then the answer that's probably more to your point is that whatever you have on your computer or your phone does not matter at all because it all goes through this. Yeah, the Bluetooth digital signal that you get from your phone or your computer into this never touches the DAC that's on your phone and computer. And Scott Pleasure, appreciate you jumping in and helping out with that description as well. Oh, and Scott, you're saying the XM4s look pretty big. The XM3s are already pretty big for your ears. Let me just do a real quick fit test so you can compare the XM4s to the XM3s inside of a human ear. I'll do this sort of left and right style. All right, so, oh, that's weird. But yeah, so there is the XM4 in my ear. And if I spin around this way, you can see the XM3. I think the XM3 honestly probably fits a little bit better, just because it's mostly going into the ear canal, where the XM4 does touch more of my concha bowl. I guess if I had larger ears, maybe that wouldn't be a problem, but there you go. And David K saying, not a fan of the design, kind of awkward. Okay. El Jefe, nice to see you. I'm curious. I'm imagine you've done a review of these things, or you're working on a review. I'll have to check that one out after I'm done with my stream. Usually when I review an item like this, right? I referenced other reviews, and I know people have been pretty positive about these because I see the headlines, right? I think, Linus Tech Tips, they did a video and Linus is saying that he switched from AirPods to these. I haven't actually watched the review because I want to avoid being, I don't want to be influenced by other people. It's kind of impossible, right? I'm reading these headlines. I know what people are saying about it in broad strokes, but I don't want to accidentally take their words and put them into mine. So that's why I avoid looking at other reviews beforehand, but really hard to avoid headlines, especially thumbnails. How do you people that are worried about spoilers deal with that? I don't care about spoilers because I don't care about TV and movie. Spoiler, but yeah. Still catching up with chat here. See some talk about LDAC. I believe Android built LDAC support in as of like Android 8.0 or something like that. You could probably go back and get more specifics on that. But yeah, pretty much every Android device supports LDAC. And no iOS device supports LDAC. iOS just supports AAC, which, I did my test of Apple lossless versus lossy, and lossy is AAC. So in that test, like, AAC can be pretty good. But if I'm starting with lossless music, I do still want the higher bitrate codec, and LDAC. I appreciate that it's here, and that's part of why I prefer using these on Android. Scott Pleasure saying, I hate touch controls on True Wireless. I always manage to both miss the targets and dislodge the IM. Yeah, it's not the best. I mean, it's always going to be some sort of compromise, right? They are small things in your ears and you want to have some sort of access to controls. I do think the AirPods have the best balance of it. And I know people are, maybe not the biggest fans of Apple and they don't like to hear that kind of stuff, but I do think that Apple has it best at this point. Mynak Sharma asking, if someone has an older generation iPhone, does it mean that they are stuck with AAC, or do they support Apple lossless? So, I think at this point you're getting a couple of things confused, which I'll try and clarify as best as possible. If you're talking just about Bluetooth, all iPhones, including the brand newest of iPhones, only support up to AAC. That's the best Bluetooth codec that iPhone and iOS supports. If you're talking about Apple Music being able to play, AAC files, which is their high quality lossy versus lossless files, I believe any iPhone or any iOS device that can upgrade to like whatever the latest version is, 14.6, is that what it is? Any device that can upgrade to that should be able to play it, no problem. But you're not going to get lossless over Bluetooth. Not on iOS because it only supports AAC Bluetooth, but you're also not going to get lossless even on Android because, LDAC is close, but it's still a retrans code and it's still a lossy compression. Herein, you're guessing a 3, man. Your score guesses kept progressively getting lower. I'm curious, what was I saying that made you keep knocking it down? Big Boss, Mark does karaoke when? I don't think anybody wants that. What's up, Precog? Nice to see you. You know what? Maybe we should trade. I'll trade you the XM4s for the Etymotic Evo, if you're able to. Martin Ferreira, how's it going? Nice to see you again. El Jefe saying LDAC is great on Android devices, but there are some drawbacks for both range and battery life. And yeah, that's actually a good point. You know, for me, I didn't even talk about battery life on the XM4s. They claim, I believe, 8 hours of battery life on the buds, and I forget what they claim on the case. I didn't talk about it because for me, it just wasn't ever an issue, and I was using it in kind of the worst case scenario. I had a custom EQ. I was usually listening with active noise canceling because it does change the sound a little bit, and always listening with LDAC, which, as El Jefe is mentioning, all those things combined, especially the LDAC, will drop the expected battery life of these. I think Sony has some specific claims, right? Normally they say that's 8 hours, up to 8 hours in the buds, and I think with all of that stuff enabled, it's probably closer to 4 hours. For me, it was never an issue because I'm never listening to a true wireless earphone for more than a couple of hours at a time. I never ran these things out of battery, I guess is a way of putting it. Oh, and Big Boss, you're saying you're not a big fan of multi-point on the Aeropex, which is a bone conduction headset that I like to use, Big Boss likes to use. Yeah, and that's actually a good example of the awkwardness of multi-point. And El Jefe is throwing in also, I agree, multi-point can be a bit weird for sure. It's overly awkward. And I feel like the solution here with the XM4, maybe not as elegant in concept, in functionality is actually just a lot more predictable. Big Boss drove down the highway with the XM4s in transparency mode. Interesting. That's brave. I don't know if I would do that. Oh, there was actually one thing I didn't talk about with the noise canceling here. A lot of noise canceling devices, if I go out into the wild world and there's wind, wind will trip them up. And I think even the AirPods Pro are prone to that, right? And it's actually pretty annoying, and to the point that I will usually disable active noise canceling in a windy environment. Here with the XM4s, there's actually an option in the app to do wind reduction. I forget exactly what the setting is called, but it's basically wind reduction. And it did a really good job of cutting out those wind noises, to the point that I was happy to leave these things in noise canceling mode, despite the fact that it was pretty windy outside. Now, there did seem to be a little bit of a downside to that, in that my connection with my phone, which was just in my pocket, became more unstable. And I don't know for a fact that it was caused by the fact that I had this extra processing happening, this extra wind reduction processing happening, but that was my hypothesis. And it seemed that when I disabled the wind reduction, that the connection became more stable. And then when I had the wind reduction on, the connection became less stable. Could have been a completely misdiagnosis. This is not science, but that was my experience. Rorik saying it sounds like a true wireless version of the WH-1000XM4s. I don't know. I haven't actually heard the Sony over-ear XM4s. I've heard and reviewed the over-ear XM3s, which I did not like. And I didn't like them so much that I just didn't even bother with the XM4s. The true wireless XM4s, way better than the XM3 headphones. I don't know how they compare to the XM4s. I don't know whose idea it was at Sony also to name those the same thing. Sangriantovsky asking, which do I prefer, the File FH3 or the FD5? And for me, I pretty significantly prefer the FH3. It's just got a better mid-range presentation for my tastes. And the bass is very present. Like, it's a lot of sub bass, but it's pretty isolated into the sub bass, so it never feels like boomy or bloated. Where the FD5 I found a little bit V-shaped in the tonality, which just means that the mid-range is not the most textured and the most detailed. The lower treble I found maybe a little bit too spicy for sometimes, and the bass is kind of fun, I'll be honest, but it's a little bit more bass than I like. So some people will definitely like the FD5s better, but for my taste, a mid-range focus, the FH3. Bunker Buster saying, wait, wasn't it you who said they wouldn't review True Wireless, or am I tripping? I might have said something like that, but probably not as absolute. A number of years ago, when I first started this channel, I spent more time reviewing kind of low-level or entry-level cheap True Wireless earphones, just because I found the market really interesting. You know, that was around the time that AirPods had been out for maybe a year or so, and the market was just unloading with all of these like $30 True Wireless earphones, which are not too bad. And I found that an interesting space to explore, but also just kind of eventually got to the point where they all sound roughly the same. They're all some form of a V-shaped tune. They all have kind of roughly the same downsides and the same upsides. So like, it just became not that interesting. And I've had some people in the comments ask me about reviewing other, you know, sub $100 True Wireless sets. And my interest is just pretty low in that space. My interest when it comes to True Wireless is mostly going to be focused on stuff that can do stuff, new products that can do that stuff better. Especially sound quality, or maybe it's going to be features. And the XM4s was a set that I had a hunch that there was a good chance they could do something better. So, you know, I haven't reviewed the XM3s, but I have reviewed all three of these on the channel before. I've also recently reviewed the Moondrop Sparks, which is a True Wireless set. So I'm definitely not opposed to reviewing True Wireless sets, but I am a little bit bored of a lot of them. And yeah, I guess maybe that's just the best way to put it. So apologies if I said something in the comments that maybe led you to believe that I will never review a True Wireless set again. I'm definitely not opposed to it, but I'm just maybe a little bit more skeptical of my interest levels. Kevin Jim asking, I think, an important question: is the EQ saved in the iAmps itself? And yes, I think I already answered that in the review, but maybe you either missed that part or you asked this before I got to that part. But yeah, the EQ, like all the settings, is baked into the firmware on the device itself, which means if I take this from my Android device to my MacBook, which doesn't have an app, the EQ settings that I changed still carry through. And that was actually how I was able to measure the frequency response of the different EQ settings, which, if you're curious to check them out, I do have on squig.link. I saw a question asking if I can disable all touch controls, and that's a good question. I actually didn't try that. I know on the Galaxy Buds, there is an option to disable all touch controls, which avoids the problem of accidental touches, but I just found it like, it neutered them too much. Like I need to be able to play and pause my music. And because a phone doesn't have a play and pause button, I rely on the controls. So, you know, based on my experience with the Galaxy Buds, I prefer having finicky touch controls to no touch controls. So I didn't dig into it for the XM4s. Santiago Sanchez asking, are the AirPods still convenient on Android? And it's been a while. It's honestly been a while since I used the AirPods Pro on Android. But when I reviewed these things initially, I spent, I think, most of my time with them on Android because I was reviewing, I think maybe that was around the time of the Pixel 4. And I was reviewing the Pixel 4 XL. But generally, I found that these things work pretty well on Android. There's some downsides, like the auto pause feature doesn't work, and that's just really pretty annoying. You can't do firmware updates through Android, which is pretty annoying. And I did find the connectivity was a little bit more flaky. On my iPhone, it's just very stable, but on Android device, I did find it to be a little flaky. I don't know if that's a thing that they've addressed with firmware updates since then, because it's been a couple of years since I used my AirPods Pro on an Android device. But for the most part, I would say these are very usable on Android. The AirPods Max, however, I would not use on Android, for reasons that I go into in that review, the AirPods Max review. But I just mentioned that just to demonstrate that there is a line that something can cross where I will not recommend it. And the AirPods Pro on Android, I think are fine. Rorik's asking, how do they compare to wired IMs and technicalities? And that was one of the things that I honestly found pretty impressive here on the XM4s, is I think they're pretty competitive, honestly. Didn't seem to be any obvious downsides in terms of technicalities versus a lot of my favorite single dynamic driver earphones. I would say that these things, let's see, technically probably not quite up there with something like the JVC FDX1. And partly that's just because the FDX1 is a much brighter tune, which tends to have the effect of sounding more technical. But it's not too far behind. Like, I would say these, in my opinion, sound more technical to me than something like the FiO FD5, which is a $300 single dynamic driver earphone with a wire. I think these do better. Das Ninja Stick, you staying up on MMA, but no, not watching UFC. Okay. Bradford asking, how do they compare to some wired sets like Starfield and Aria? And honestly, I like these better than the Starfield and the Arias. Now, that may not be surprising to some folks that are just looking at price tag and assuming that price tag equals sound quality, but that's not always the case. And the Starfield and the Aria are pretty solid sets, but I like these. I think they're just more technical. The treble quality on the XM4s, once you EQ it up to a nice level, the quality of the treble I think is better here than it is on the Arias and the Starfields. Now, I'm not giving the Arias and the Starfields the benefit of EQ because they don't have it baked in. Maybe with EQ I would get them to a place that I like them better, but honestly, yeah, I think I like listening to music better on the XM4s. Oh, Scott, so you ended up ordering the PI7s yesterday. Happy to send them if I'm interested. Maybe I will take you up on that. And maybe I can also send you the XM4s if you want to compare them. Do a little bit of a trade here. Ali Asmar asking, which one's better, Sony versus AirPods? Well, if you rewind a little bit, I compared them in a number of different categories. In some categories, I think the AirPods are better. In other categories, I think the Sonys are better. Which one's important? I'll leave that up to you. But when it comes just to listening to music, I actually like the Sonys better. My next Sharma asking, should one get Chi-Fi over XM4s? And it really depends on what you want. Like, that's a really broad question. I will say that for my use, as much as I like the way that these things sound, and I think that they do sound better than some other popular earphones like the Starfields, I'm not getting rid of my wired IMs. I still prefer listening with a wire, partly because of the sound quality, partly just because I get, maybe a broader range of sound signatures, and I just have more options, right? When you're shopping on sound signature and like these are your 4 options, like these are good options, don't get me wrong, but it's only 4 options. In the wired space, you have so many options. So yeah, I'm not giving up my wired stuff. I just prefer listening on a wire. I prefer listening with the digital audio player with play pause buttons and stuff like that. I mean, I could do that on the XM4s, but I prefer not having to worry about battery life on my earphones for most part. So certain things the XM4 is better for, but just purely for wanting to sit back and listen to music, I don't think they're going to replace my wired stuff. Rorik saying the Sony MDR7506 has aged like milk. Yeah, that is a set. I haven't spent, I'll be totally fair. I have not spent a lot of time listening to that set, but every time I've listened to it, like I've wondered for a second, is this set broken? I don't like it. It's too bright. It's nasty. Oh, and Edward Bador, so you were the one that said earlier you'd gotten the XM4s as well. Your thoughts are, they make the best complete true wireless package. Even if the stock soundstage is not my taste, I use the app to brighten up the sound. Cool. So see, there's another take right there. Pretty much everybody that I've talked to in the audio space that has heard the XM4s has commented that they're pretty warm and pretty dark and need more treble. So I think that's a pretty safe thing to say. Now, how much treble you want is going to depend on your taste. And I guess it's nice that the app lets you tune it to taste. But I'm still going to complain about the stock tuning. Well, Bradford saying you're going to ask how they compare to the ER2, but you understand the ER2 is a bit of an outlier when it comes to sound quality for the price. So that'd be unfair. I mean, I don't know. I think that in terms of like detail and texture, the XM4s might actually be a little bit better than the ER4. Just in terms of giving a little bit better sense of a 3D stage. Not that either of these are big soundstage earphones. Just I think that the tactility of the sound and the definition specifically is a little bit stronger actually on the XM4s versus the ER2. That said, I think the tonality on the ER2 is much better. And if I had only one of them to listen to, I would personally pick the ER2 XR. Rob Hawk, yikes, you missed the review. That's okay. There is a rewind button, I think. Did I just make that up? Is there no rewind button? Sumi asking me for my top 3 favorite IEMs. That's a really hard question. My recommendation would be to check out the channel, look at the playlists tab, and I've got playlists for my favorite, like my top 5 picks in a handful of different categories, or a handful of different, specifically, price ranges. Oh, Kyrode, when you mentioned the audiogram, you were talking about the Mimi app on the iPhone. I installed it, and I think I did the test, but I didn't do a lot of tests, like A/B testing with it. So, totally whooshed what you were asking me, but I don't have a much better answer at this point either. Diogo saying, you don't care for movies and TV shows. How do you live? I spend way too much time on Discord, on YouTube, and on Squiglink. And doing live streams, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know. Just fiction stories just doesn't really appeal to me at all. I'm not motivated by it. I also have a hard time just sitting still and doing the same thing for 2 hours at a time, which might be a little bit of an ironic thing to say as I'm sitting here doing a live stream for going on, what are we at? A little over an hour. But yeah, I'm a bit of a multitasker, and movies are just, they require way too much attention. Lou Marlowe saying variety is underrated in earphones. No such thing as perfect. And I kind of feel the same way. I mean, I do have preferences when it comes to tonality. In fact, on squig.link, I've got a target curve that says like, this is the ideal frequency response, but I really don't want everything to sound like that. That's just going to be kind of my baseline. I like what you're saying. I like having variety. I like, pulling out my ER2 XR when I want that sound. I like pulling out the Tanch Gymkhana when I want that sound. Pulling out the Moondrop S8 when I want that sound. So they might all have some things in common, but there are definitely different tunes. And the XM4 is a different tune entirely. And there will be reasons or times when I want to have that sound. Probably not going to plan on reviewing the KZ AZ09. To whomever was asking that one. Sorry. Super chat. Ernesto Prieto, thanks for the super chat. Really appreciate that. Saying, love your honesty, brother. Keep up your style. And I'm glad that that's coming through. Honesty is a really high value of mine. it honestly, it feels a little bit dickish even to suggest that it's not a high value of everybody else out there. But I personally really value honesty, and I try to reflect that in how I engage with people and how I reflect my own mind. But you never really know if it comes through, and so I really appreciate you saying that, Ernesto. Big Boss saying, yeah, the treble resolution is really nice on the XM4s. I'm really pretty surprised here. Like I talked about I quite like the sound here on the Galaxy Buds. In fact, before the XM4s, this was my favorite sounding true wireless IM, and probably my favorite sounding just Bluetooth anything. Like most Bluetooth stuff, if I'm perfectly frank, I don't listen to music on. These things are definitely worth listening to music on, but the treble does have a bit of a plasticiness to it. It's not necessarily sharp and like irritating and painful or anything like that. It's just got a bit of a weird character to it. Here on the XM4s though, I found the treble really quite well done once you boost it. Juan Rook, how's it going? Nice to see you. Rob Hawk asked me, what do I think of Sony's top IEM? Are you talking about the Sony IER Z1R, which is like a $2,000 in-ear monitor? I'll say I have not spent very much time with it, but in fact, it was maybe 2 weeks ago. Precog Vision, who was just in chat earlier, he actually brought over the IER Z1R. So I did spend a little bit of time listening to it, and I liked it, but it's not my favorite tuning. So I'm not very tempted by it at $2,000. Like, it was good, but if I'm perfectly frank, like, it didn't strike me as standout in any way. But it's going for a thing that's not my thing. I know there's also a lot to do about the fit of the Z1R. It is a very chonky fitting IM, especially kind of like, it's like the pre-nozzle. It's like where the earphone starts to turn into the nozzle that fits into the ear canal is pretty bulbous. For me, I was lucky enough that it fit pretty well. I didn't have any issues with comfort. Maybe not the most secure fitting IM for sure, but fit-wise, it was not bad for me. Something like the Thea Audio Monarch, that is a problem for me in terms of fit. The Z1R, that was fine. Oh, and Juan, no, I never have actually checked out the Eco Phone DAC. It's an interesting little product. I've seen it before, and I've been interested in it. It's an external DAC amp for a phone that connects via USB or Lightning port and gives you a headphone jack, which is cool. And it's really pretty slim, and it seems to have some sort of adhesive, so it like fits to the back of the phone in a pretty compact and nice way, but I haven't actually tried it. I think if it had a play pause button on it, I would probably have one. But as it is, it's probably not something I would use. Like if I'm gonna attach an external DAC amp to my phone like that, I gotta get something out of it, right? Maybe it's a play pause button, or in most cases, I get a volume knob. I don't think the Eco had either of those, unfortunately. But it is, I think, a nice looking solution. Ajuna Deep saying, nice, clean summer look. Oh, thank you. Yeah, see, I was threatening to cut my hair, and I actually got my hair cut on Friday. Shout out to my homie Vu. But I kept it long. I mean, it's shorter than it was, but definitely cleaner. Thank you, Vu. And Ajuna Deep, thanks for noticing. Elazar asking, do I still recommend the Moondrop Sparks over other options? Is it worth saving up more? I would recommend going back and checking out my Sparks review. I think the Sparks are pretty decent, but my conclusion in that review is I actually like the Galaxy Buds Plus better. And these were initially, when they came out, I think around 150 bucks. The Sparks is 90 bucks. But I have since seen these things on sale for around 90 bucks or maybe even cheaper. So I think if you're shopping under $100, the Galaxy Buds Plus would still be my pick. The Sparks are pretty solid, but I had some issues with the connectivity and the case and stuff like that I don't know. It makes me a little bit iffy on that product. Sam asking if I could only buy one earbud, which one and why? I'd probably buy the Moondrop S8, like just because I love the sound of it. It gives me the technical performance that I want in a tonality that's maybe not quite my preference, but pretty good, pretty close to it. And it looks beautiful and it fits great. So it's just comfortable for me to wear all the time. I don't really have any issues. I could die with the Moondrop S8 and be happy. I don't know why I would die with it though. Why did I say that? That's not a thing people say. Alejandro saying you're late to the review. What are the strong areas for each one? I recommend going back and checking out my comparison, because I basically spent some time ranking these four in different categories, and they all have different strengths. I mean, the summary is that I think the AirPods Pro are still the most convenient. I think the XM4s have the best sound quality for music. I think the Galaxy Buds Plus are probably they're the cheapest here on the table, and really good sound quality. So for that sake, they're pretty good. And the XM3s are probably my least favorite in almost all categories. That's the summary. If you want more detail, rewind. Rob Hawk with the super chat. Appreciate that. No question though. Wow, thanks, man. Minoc asking, have I tried artists like Porcupine Tree, Carnival, and the likes on these reviews? No, I haven't tried. You know, Porcupine Tree sounds like a band that someone recommended to me a couple of years ago, and I think I tried them out, but I don't remember. I definitely wasn't hooked by them. If you're curious about what kind of music I like to use for reviews, a couple of sources. One, on my channel, go to the playlists tab, and there is a playlist of reference music. It's a lot of songs I like to use, and some of it's a little out of date. It's not stuff I listen to often lately, but that's a pretty good idea. And then another thing to check out was my recent video where I talked about trying to pick out the difference between lossy and lossless with Apple Music's new update. In that video, I actually put together a playlist, an Apple Music playlist that I was able to share. So if you are an Apple Music user, you can click on that playlist and listen to 10 songs that I think are really good test tracks. No Porcupine Tree though. Lately, really been, for I don't know, quite a while now, been pretty big on Men I Trust. They've got some albums that are like really heavy on the electronic. They've got some albums that are a lot more acoustic. They've got a live album, and just really strong vocals throughout all of them. So really good band. Elhan's asking, what do I think about the Meze Rye Solo? I haven't tried it. I haven't heard either the Rye Solo or the Rye Penta. So no real thoughts. I think it looks handsome. It looks like it's a really well-built stainless steel IM, but I don't know anything about how it sounds. Adrian A asking about the Noble Audio Falcon. I'm not actually familiar with that model. I might have seen that in passing, but if I'm perfectly honest, I'm pretty skeptical of true wireless being done well by companies that are not electronics companies. So Noble being primarily an audio company or an IM company, they might get the sound quality right. Although, I've heard a few Noble IMs in my past and none of them have been my favorite, but they might have some advantages in sound quality, but electronics is hard to do, man. And one IM that you might notice is conspicuously missing from this is the Sennheiser Momentum True Wireless 2, which I've done a review of it, and it's okay. It's just okay. And it's because, and kind of like I was talking with the Moondrop Sparks, generally pretty good sound quality, nice tuning, some good things to say about it, but the electronics experience with it leaves something to be desired. Rafif asking best vocal. That's best? You want to know the best? That's a big ask. I don't want to say the best, but one that I like I like using Men I Trust for vocals. Like, listen to the song "Break for Lovers," which isn't even like their main. They have a main singer in more recent albums, but "Break for Lovers" I believe came before they had established that. But really, really nice vocal content. I think if some other good examples would be like Nick Drake, which is an older artist. His vocal content I think is really pretty excellent. Oh, and I see, Qatar, you actually just noticed that I have Nick Drake in my list. Yeah, so Nick Drake I think is really good vocal. Four Balls asking budget MP3 player recommendation and why. Check out the, again, I'm going to refer you to the playlists tab on the channel. I do have a playlist of digital audio player reviews, including, it might be all of my reviews, but I actually don't remember if it's all of them or just the ones I recommend. I think it's all of my digital audio player reviews in the order of my preference, and you can find out like which one suits your price range and your feature requirements, because that's going to make up a lot of it. Juan asking, well, what do I do with all the IMs that I reviewed? So I actually have a cabinet over here to my right that I store them in, and I store them. I'm reaching over here to grab some of them. Earthquake. I store them in these little cases. So I basically have a very serial killer looking cabinet over here, just full of these IMs stored in these little boxes. And I use them to reference for reviews in the future. I, use them to loan out to other people that are interested in reviewing them. So that's what I do with them. There have been some that I've given away just because I knew I was never going to touch them again. But for the most part, I just keep them in a cabinet. Sangram saying the Etymotic Evo is out, and you mentioned it's the first hybrid. Just a clarification, the Ety Evo is it's a multi-driver IM, but I believe it's not a hybrid. I believe all the drivers in it are balanced armatures, which actually you just caught. Alejandra asking, do I prefer in sound and convenience Bluetooth earbuds or IMs with the Bluetooth adapters? And I have not found a Bluetooth adapter that I like. And some of them are fine, but they're almost always a sacrifice in sound quality. They're almost always going to be larger than something like this. So if I'm using Bluetooth and I'm already making sacrifices in terms of limiting my listening options, and probably going to be some sacrifices in sound quality, if I'm going to go Bluetooth, I'm just going to go all out and get something more convenient. So I prefer this much better to something like putting a favorite IM on a wireless adapter. Gunnar Jones saying, Hi-Fi Go posted an unboxing of the limited Shanling M3X. Might check to see if they still have some for international shipping. Yeah, it looks interesting. I asked about reviewing it. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to review it though. James Torres, glad you like the reviews. I'm glad you're here watching. I like your watching. Toss Ninja Stick. Someone has a label maker. I got the label maker specifically for labeling my IM boxes. And I have to ban somebody. which is not usual. I don't even know how to do this. But Mayud, your time here is up. But I also think that's probably going to do it for this live stream. If you're interested in carrying on the conversation, like always, check out the link to my Discord server in the description down below. I'm there way too much, but if you have any questions about the XM4s or any other things that I'm reviewing, that's a good place to talk about it, or just talk about with some other folks. Big Boss, a number of other people, not DOS Ninja Sticks. A number of people you've seen here in the live chat are also active in Discord. So it's a good place to have conversation. If you like the video, please do hit the like button down below. It helps out the channel, helps other people find me. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, but I have a feeling you have. And I'll catch you in the next super review. Have a good week.